Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Science Community of Practice webinar, which is part of our continuing series featuring Yukon University's research chairs and leaders. We're hosting this talk with respect and gratitude on the traditional territory of the Kwanlundan First Nation and the Tongwetchan Council. My name is Sabrina Kinsella. I'm the Acting Science Advisor for the Yukon government. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Guillaume Nielsen, the NSERC Industrial Research Chair in Northern Mine Remediation, a program hosted at Yukon University in partnership with 7 active mines in Yukon. Dr. Nielsen moved to Canada in 2009 from France and started a master's in water and soil treatment processes at the Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique, INRS, pardon my French pronunciation, Centre Terre et Environnement, Quebec. Dr. Nielsen moved up to the Yukon in 2013, completing his PhD with a specialization in mine water passive treatment in northern climates at the Yukon Research Center. Following a year as an environmental consultant for the consulting company CH2M, Dr. Nielsen moved back to the Yukon Research Center in 2017 as a research associate in mining life cycle, and he built the NSERC Industrial Research Chair proposal, which was approved in 2018. In the last few years, he's become increasingly interested in expanding his toolset to include collaboration with industry, academic, and First Nations in water management projects. That's just a snippet of all he's accomplished in his research and professional career. I'll now pass the mic over. Today we'll hear from Dr. Nielsen about the main research trends highlighted by the mining industry and some of the projects undertaken under these trends. So welcome, Dr. Nielsen, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. I'm going to share my screen as the first step and share and ask, confirm if you see it. Well, yes, thumbs up. Good. Thank you for this introduction, for having me, giving me the opportunity to present my research program from beautiful territory, traditional territory of Kwanlundan First Nation and Tongwetchan Council. My name is Guillaume Nielsen, and I'm the NSERC Industrial Research Chair for colleges in Northern Mine Remediation, which is a way too long title that hopefully you will know a little bit more about it in a couple of minutes. What's expected today, a short introduction of the mining situation in the Yukon. I'll try to go quick on that because I don't want to waste time on the 2 other points of these presentations. I have roughly 40 slides and I want to have time for questions. I will then introduce you to my research program, the way I built it and organizing it, the Industrial Research Chair in Northern Mine Remediation, and then I'll give you examples of research projects that we are conducting with my team. I won't present any results because we probably won't have time, but I will give you links and where to find results. And if you have any questions, specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So a couple, I'll just move the little, oh, better. Quick introduction of what you probably all already know. What is specific to the Yukon? We are in the beautiful territory of the Yukon. It's the smallest of Canada's 3 federal territory. And what's important about that slide is to remind people that here, mining still leads the economy. We have very specific modern day treaties that I'm working with on a daily basis, such as the Umbrella Final Agreement. And I'm pretty sure you're all used to our regulatory framework, including YESAB and the Yukon Water Board. There's so much to say about these regulation entities. I'm just going quite fast on these introduction slides. And a reminder about our climate here, because that impacts my work a lot, and you will understand why in a couple of minutes. We have a very cold climate, and when you're trying to work with living things, such as plants and bacteria, that climate impacts your work. Very quick Yukon mining updates. We have 7 active mines in the Yukon. We have Eagle Gold Mine between Mayo and Kino, owned by Victoria Gold. Minto Mine, owned by Minto Metals, next to Pelly. BMC Minerals is the Kutsekaya project. The Coffee Mine, being under licensing, owned by Newmont. We have the Casino Mine, owned by Western Copper and Gold. Alexco owns the Kino Hill Mine, very old historical mine, There's a Selwyn project owned by Selwyn Chihong. If you need more information on these updates, most of these pictures and maps come from a very good presentation that Scott Castleman gave during the roundup a few weeks ago in Vancouver. So I can forward you the link of that presentation as well if you need more updates about mining. Let's jump into my research program, the NSERC Industrial Research Chair for Colleges in Northern Mine Remediation. So as I said, that's a way too long title. That means that I'm a researcher that partners with the industry, in my case, the mining industry, to conduct research projects. This NSERC stands for, good. So it's a federal funding entity that funds most of the research. I partner with most of the mines that I named in the previous slides, all these active mines, and NSERC as well. But the question I have very often is, how do I work with those mining companies? So first of all, those 7 mines, we named them, we regrouped them into a consortium, which is one entity called the Yukon Mining Research Consortium. I meet with this consortium 4 times per year, mainly with environmental teams, mine managers, and CEOs. And when we built this research program, we highlighted altogether environmental challenges that the mining industry is facing that is specific to the North and specific to the Yukon. And I'm the one that is supposed to provide answers and scientific evidences to help the industry facing these challenges. 3 main research trends have been highlighted. The first one is the need of water treatment, mine impacted water treatment by passive or semi-passive technologies. And I will explain you what this is in a couple of slides, if you don't know what semi-passive and passive technologies are. Mine waste management, especially waste rocks and tailings. And finally, mine revegetation. Under these trends, my team and I build research projects. We very often build our research project involving the communities, what we call the mine impacted communities, which is pretty much every Yukoner, as mining still leads the economy, but obviously focusing with First Nations because a lot of these projects happen on traditional territories. So community engagement is a very big social piece of my work. And as a guiding principle, it's a question that I often have as well. Working with mining companies, yes, but I'm a YukonU employee. I'm neutral, I'm independent, I'm transparent, apolitical researcher, and all my work must be available and publishable for the public. There is no intellectual property being generated by my research program. All of my research projects and the reports published and associated with those research projects can be found on the Northern Mine Remediation page on the main YukonU webpage. NSERC rules. So it's an NSERC research program, and that's what is written on the NSERC website. The Industrial Research Chair for Colleges support applied research leaders in their development of business-focused applied research programs. So it's written twice, applied. It's really important. We do applied research. We are meant to generate tools that must be useful and usable by the mining industry. In terms of funding, how does it work? 50% of my research budget comes from NSERC, 25% in cash comes from the industry, and 25% in kind comes from the industry. And this one is probably the most important one, because that gives me access to mine sites, camp, accommodation, the kitchen, everything that allows me to conduct applied research, having access to real mines, which is I feel very lucky to have access to these mines to conduct applied research. So I often have the question about how can you be independent when you are funded by the mining industry in cash and in kind? I think that goes back to the applied part, that support applied research. On the top of that, I apply to other kind of grants and insert my tax to support salaries and student wages. this kind of program, Industrial Research Chair, is a 5 years mandate that was supposed to be renewable twice for a potential 15 years career. But in fact, no. NSERC just announced before the summer that they cancel this research program. There is dozens of industrial research chairs. So what is the future of the research program? I don't know, but I'm working on it. We are very fortunate here at Yukon University to have access to an applied research lab. So I won't name all the analytical capacity we have and equipments, but we can conduct pretty decent research with the use of this lab and the amazing team working in it. And when there's something missing, we just create partnerships with academic partners such as UBC, U of A, U of S, when they have the specific analytical equipment we don't have. The Northern Mine Remediation team, so far, and you will know a little bit more when I will present the few projects I'm working on. We have 2 post-secondary projects with 1 PhD and 1 master. We have 4 staff, 2 lab technicians, 1 community-based research assistant, and 1 postdoc fellow that is being hired right now, and 5 research assistants, which are YukonU students hired as research assistants. And that's a very important part because this is one of the big meaning of this research program as well, is to train and give proper professional experience to YukonU students. And we hired in the Northern Mine Remediation team over 20 research assistants in the last 4 years, 3 years. So now the research projects. As I told you, there's 3 main research trends: mine impacted water treatment by semi-passive or passive treatment, mine waste management, and mine revegetation. I'll give you some examples, not all of them, we don't have time, of the main research projects being undertaken under those 3 main research trends. First of all, mine impacted water treatment by passive treatments. I'd like to talk to you about the Eagle Gold bioreactor that are at Victoria Gold. It's a pilot scale experiment that has been started in 2019. It's being run for more than 2 years now. But before, I have to explain a little bit of the background story of why we need these kind of treatments, why we need this kind of research. So I apologize if there is any chemists in the audience or any geologists in the audience. I'm using really plain language and trying to have the good wording to make it understandable for everybody. So this is the very simple way of how a mine operates. Obviously, you dig a big hole to extract the rocks. You separate the waste rocks that you pile in a waste rock pile and the ore. The ore is being processed in a plant that generates the product that you want: copper, zinc, gold, silver, and the byproduct of that step is called the tailings. Tailings and waste rock pile can generate contamination. What kind of contamination? Contaminate water, or what is commonly called acid mine drainage or acid rock drainage. How does that work? It's naturally occurring. Earthquake would do the same, but mining obviously helps. When sulfidic minerals is exposed to both oxygen in the air and water, that leads to the production of 3 things: acidity, sulfate, and heavy metals. That is called acid mine drainage. If we take the example of pyrite, so see, the webcam is not the best, especially mine, it's very bad, so we don't see it. So this is a pyrite rock full of shiny little dots, and pyrite is also known as the fool's gold. It's an iron sulfur rock. So and when it's exposed to both oxygen and water, after being exposed to the air, it generates 3 things: acidity, protons, sulfate, and heavy metals, in that case, iron. So you obviously need to balance the equation. Oops. And this is very important because both tailings and waste rock can generate acid mine drainage or acid rock drainage, because as you understand now, the rocks are culprits in the process. This picture here has been taken when I was working in Faro, sampling tailings in Faro, And as you can see here, when the tailings are exposed to oxygen from the air and water, it leads to oxidation. And you know that iron, when it's being oxidized, creates rust. And this is where the rusty color comes from here. There is other contamination that can be generated by the mining industry, obviously. Cyanides. Cyanides are being used in gold mines to leach gold. Nitrogen, I'll talk about that a bit because nitrogen comes from blasting residue. So all the mines using explosive have issues with nitrogen compounds, nitrate, nitrite, etc., ammonia, ammonium, sulfate, we discussed about that, phosphate, and radioactivity. As a good example, the coffee mine owned by Newmont has to deal with a very high natural uranium concentration at the coffee mine. So radioactivity is something that is actually quite common. So what can we do about it, about this contamination? Two main approaches: active treatments and passive treatments. Active treatments rely on chemicals, labor, and buildings. Remember that. I think next slide is going to remind you the need of buildings. On the other hand, passive treatments use what Mother Earth can provide. So mainly plants and bacteria. Active mines are active treatments are very efficient and cost effective. The most commonly used by the mining industry, including in the Yukon and in cold climate, is called lime treatment. So lime is a base, and as you know now, acid mine drainage generates acidity. So in a big plant, you have a mine impacted water, acidic, you add some lime, the pH reaches neutrality, and the heavy metals precipitate, and as every precipitates, as every solid, it settles down, it generates a sludge, and the water is treated, decontaminated. This is what it's really briefly explained in those small diagram chart here, where you mix mine impacted water with a chemical, and then there's a solid liquid separation. You can reprocess that many times in what's called high density sludge plant, and at the end, the water is treated. Okay, but if I said it's cost competitive, if it's efficient, why do we need to develop new technologies? Why do we need to, as researchers, rethink better practices? Here is the why, and it's according to me. So first of all, as I said, active treatments rely on chemicals. So in that case, the first thing you need to treat mine impacted water is to mine the lime. So you open a new mine to mine the lime. Then you need to truck it. You need to store and transform it, the lime. Then you need to mix it with water in those big plants, big buildings. And then you need to manage the sludge that is being generated, which is highly contaminated. And this is the other why. So this is a picture of the Eiffel Tower from my hometown, and Le Pont du Gard, big bridge built by the Roman in the 1st century. So why did I put those pictures here? Well, it's to remind people that those guys, those buildings are still standing because someone, so as I said, built in the 1st century, and I think the Eiffel Tower is 134 years old. They're still standing because someone, a specific team, is doing maintenance job on a daily basis. Without that, they would collapse. When you have building, you have to maintain them almost on a daily basis. These guys are painting the Eiffel Towers from the bottom to the top, and they do that every 7 years, and it takes 3 years. So it's just to keep that in mind. And also remember that the mining industry is the only industry in the world that is committed with oil and gas, that is committed to handle the contamination it generates forever. We're not talking about 10 years, 20 years. 100 years or hundreds of years. It's forever. So when you have a technology that relies on chemicals, labor, and buildings, it means you will have to maintain the system forever. And this is why there is a need of passive treatment systems. I'm going to read that because that's really important. Passive treatment systems are based on chemical and biological reactions that naturally occur in the environment and offer a potential sustainable option that is adequate for long-term mine drainage treatment during and after mine closure. But passive treatment system, there is a but. This is why we need research, just because of the but here. These passive treatment systems face challenges in cold climates that include hydraulic failures, freezing, winter, reduced microbial activity, which is the main one that impacts my work, and increased water flow during spring months. So one of the quick water break. There's a lot of different passive treatments that have been developed. The one I use the most is called a sulfate reducing passive bioreactors. So a bioreactor is a fancy word to say that we are basically growing bacteria in a specific place. And I like this one because adapted for the mining industry, this one consumes sulfate first. Remember, sulfate is one of the byproducts generated by the acid mine drainage generation. So that's a good first point. On the other hand, it produces something called sulfide. And this sulfide combines with heavy metals. This is one of the also main contamination coming from the mining industry, and it precipitates as a metal sulfide. If we check the basic chemistry around it, you have contaminated water here from the mining industry, full of sulfate. On the other hand, it generates sulfide. This sulfide combines with heavy metals and it precipitates as a solid, and the water is considered treated. But there's a blank here. This is the secret weapon I need, called sulfate reducing bacteria. We need bacteria as a secret weapon in those bioreactors, and carbon, which is the food for bacteria. And those bacteria, they are quite handy. First of all, because they're called ubiquitous. It means you can find them absolutely everywhere on Earth. One and one only condition, it needs to be anoxic. Oxygen is toxic for these bacteria. It means that if you shovel outside right now, deep enough to have anoxic conditions, in your sediment, in your dirt, you will have sulfate-reducing bacteria, already cold adapted, that you can use to treat mine-impacted water. So this is pictures I took with a microscope from another study where we confirmed a few years ago that even if those sulfate-reducing bacteria are mesophilic, which means they like room temperature, they can defeat is not the good word, they can mitigate the cold with the right amount of carbon source and the right source of carbon source. And we tried many things, from ethanol, methanol, molasses, peat, brewery residue from Yukon Brewery, every kind of carbon source we could try. And we can, if we keep them happy, that's the game, if we keep those bacteria happy, they can work for us in mine-impacted water treatment processes. So going back to this study, in those pilot scale bioreactors, duplicates, we implemented 2 duplicates, one inside a shed that's heated all year long at 5 degrees Celsius, and one outside of the shed that freeze and thaw following seasonal events. Why is that? It's because in that case, Victor Hugo came to me and said, we have a problem. We know that bacteria can be used. We know that it could work, but what we don't know is, what do we do in the winter when all the water that is being collected by a ditch from the waste rock pile, it freezes. There is no water being generated. So if we implement a bioreactor treatment system in the summertime, what happens in the winter? Do we have to heat the bioreactor to keep the bacteria alive? Do we have to feed them with sulfate and carbon and make it complex and not that passive anymore? And nothing in the literature. we didn't know if those bacteria can handle freeze and cell cycles. So I designed this experiment, pilot scale, to understand if those bacteria can handle freeze and cell cycles. As I said, it's been 2 years that it's being run, and we obviously are studying the chemistry and the subsequent removal of the contamination of concern, in that case, arsenic, antimony, and selenium. So I said I wouldn't present any results, but I couldn't resist. In here, you can just see very quickly that the sulfate removal is quite high, and there is a strong correlation with temperature. Sulfate removal is better. That means the bacteria are working well when the temperature are a little bit warmer, but they're still working well. And because they consume sulfate, they produce sulfide, and this sulfide combines with the two contaminants of concern, and it precipitates. And as you can see, there is no removal, but you can see that the square here is mine impacted water, and after my bioreactors, it drops down a lot, it decreases a lot. So that means we are successfully removing some heavy metals. We take a lot of different measurements, very, very good environment for the bacteria. This is ORP. When it's around those negative value, it means it's good environment for the bacteria. And we're doing as well, so this is the chemistry, but the best tool, cutting tool that we have access to, and more access to, is genomic characterization. To better understand how our microbial population evolves following freeze and cell cycles, for example, the best tool we have is take a biological microbial samples, you freeze them in liquid nitrogen, minus 200 degrees Celsius, you bring them back to the lab. Sometimes I require a little bit of help from my son here, and you keep them in a minus 86 freezer until you can extract DNA, sequence the DNA, and do a genomic characterization. I have partnerships with UBC for this kind of stuff, and we have preliminary results, but the genomic characterization is being done really right now, literally right now. So very interesting results soon that will allow us to compare how the bacteria react to freeze and cell cycles in the Yukon. Another experiment that we designed was with Newmont, and Newmont said, well, we would like to potentially use another passive treatment technology called permeable reactive barriers for our heap leach post-closure. We don't know if that's feasible. So I partnered with Lorax, a famous environmental consulting company, and designed an experiment where we tried different recipe in columns to try to grow specific bugs to remove the contaminant of concern. And in that case, arsenic, nitrate from blasting, and uranium, because they have high uranium, natural uranium on site. And we run that experiment in those columns, lab scale, in this big fridge, because we're trying to mimic the cold. So all the study for 9 months was conducted at 4 point something degrees. And we generated a lot of results, and the report as well is on the Northern Mine Remediation website. Another mine impacted water treatment project is the master we built and launched this January, which is called semi-passive treatments to remove nitrate in cold climate at Minto. I said nitrate is a big contaminant for the entire mining industry because it comes from blasting residue. And what we did is we sampled specific inoculum, so bacterial population, from the mine sites, 20 different locations, to try to have the bugs we want to have, which is the nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria. And why from the mine site? Because the inoculum, when we try to use it in treatment facilities, it needs to be already adapted to the conditions. Cold adapted, of course, but to the very specific conditions of the mine site. So it was good to take those bacterial samples, inoculum samples from the mine site. And we are, this is in the lab right now, we're growing those bacteria, and we will try then to use it in different technologies to try to remove the nitrates from Minto mine. And if everything goes well, we will scale the project up to pilot scale this fall and install a pilot plant experiment in at Minto mine. I'm good on time. Okay. Remember, mine impacted water, first trend, mine waste management, second trend, and mine remediation, third trend. So a project under the mine waste management research trend is, so first of all, same question, why do we need research to do that, to do more than already exists? You remember now, and you know now that acid mine drainage is being generated when you have oxygen and water, and it leads to acidity, sulfate, and heavy metals. What happens very often is the mining industry removes or oxygen or water from the process, and it doesn't generate acid mine drainage generation. When I hold that big pirate rock in my hand, it's not dangerous because yes, it's exposed to oxygen from the air in my office, but there's no water, so it won't generate acid mine drainage. What they usually do is in the pit, they put all the tailings and waste rocks and they submerge it with water. They create an artificial lake. So indeed, you increase the water a lot, but oxygen diffusion in water is very low. So there you remove the oxygen and there is no acid mine drainage generation. But these technologies are more and more challenged, especially in the north, because of climate change. Increased temperature means increased evaporation, and maintaining the water level is challenging. Also, a lot of the layers that are permafrost layers that we're supposed to hold forever are thawing. So we need to develop new technologies. There's also technologies using soil covers. It's very expensive, you need a lot of soil, and it's actually quite complex in design. So one of the new technology available to better manage waste from mining industry is called saturated cover. It's basically you mix technology number one and technology number two. You add a very simple monolayer cover on the top of your tailings, for example, and you play with groundwater to saturate those tailings to a certain point, and it limits oxygen diffusion, so acid mine drainage generation. What we don't know is how the freeze and thaw cycles that we will have in the Yukon will impact that oxygen diffusion in the reactive material such as tailings. So we designed a column experiment that looks like that with tailings. In that case, that's inert material, but let's say tailings, a simple cover on the top, and then water level, nothing, mid-level, and fully submerged. And we injected oxygen in freezing and thawing conditions and see how the oxygen diffusion was being impacted. The phase one of that experiment, that is what it was the columns we built. The problem we had is it's quite simple to measure oxygen. You have these oxygen probes, pretty easy to do, but guess what? They don't handle freezing conditions. So that wasn't working. So we actually had to use another data called volumetric frozen water content and transform that data that we could take in freezing conditions to through a complex mathematical model to assessment of oxygen concentration. And remember, this program is really supposed to produce applied research, useful tools. And because of the complexity of the mathematical model, all those coefficients, those variations, we decided to take it as a good study. We have a report published, but we stepped back and we said we need to have a more simple measurement. So we created these second columns here, where we still measure all the same measurements, but we have this oxygen probe here that is protected by a heat wire, which is the gutter wire that you can use in your roof. So sometimes you have to be creative to make it work. And we can generate this kind of graph. This is conducted right now, so the report is not generated for this phase two. It will be soon available to the public, or you can see that there is a correlation between the temperature in blue and the oxygen diffusion in the columns in yellow and in orange. last research trend, after a water break, is the mine revegetation. So I knew that this one would be big and long because you're working with growing seasons. And I decided to, and this is the only project where all the consortium, the 7 mines all together, really agreed and said, we need mine vegetation research. You know, sometimes the research project I build are very specific to a mine or to a problematic. This one is very general. So I decided to build a PhD because that was within the time frame I needed. And and I had the perfect and ideal PhD candidate, Crystal Hisbister. You can see her doing her morning yoga at the Minto mine before she planted literally thousands of shrubs. Once again, where does the problem come from? One, the lack of knowledge on how to do revegetation in the north. 2, the lack of commercially available native seed bank that simply and almost doesn't exist. And 3, the definition of success. And I'll take a minute and a half in here to tell you a story. When I was building that project at the very, very early stages, I was doing a workshop in a community and I was trying to see if there's an interest. And I pretended that I had this disturbed land for mining. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use this kind of grass and it will be covered in green. So would you be happy if that happens? Would you consider it success? And a student raised his hand and said, I don't care about how it looks. Will it bring back the caribou? He said. And as a scientist, I was like, I hadn't thought about that. That makes it very practical, very real. And another one said, and why don't we use it for berry picking? Because we have these traditional activities that we can't do anymore. And so that would mean a lot to have berry picking. And so, that makes it very, very practical, very real. And the definition of success hasn't been defined with the proper people, which is in that case very often First Nation impacted communities. So half of this PhD project, and that was not the plan at the beginning, and I'm very happy it is now, half of it has a big social component, investigating with First Nations what is success, what native seeds we should select and try to grow, etc., etc. And half of it is science, with University of Alberta, where we're trying to develop a new techniques to grow revegetation on disturbed mine sites using shrubs as shelters, etc. There is also a complete report update on the website. And yeah, the first summer field season happened last summer because the project was really delayed and impacted by the pandemic, but it's on track now. Engaging with community, as you understand, is really important. Almost 100% of my research projects are built from the early stages with First Nation communities and First Nation students. And my way to connect is through giving workshops and courses. Because when I had the chance to connect with elders, all of them told me, go to the youth, go to the youth. This is the importance, go to the youth. So many years ago now, probably 8-9 years ago, I designed a mining workshop that evolved to the Northern Mine Remediation Workshop, where I go to the communities, usually between 5 and 12 times per summer, pre-pandemic. And I explain about mining contamination, acid mine drainage. I pretend to be a mad scientist, and I have hands-on and visual experiments that supports what I'm trying to say. And that's working really well. And that works that well that last summer, 2 summers ago, I gave the workshop in Pelly, and the course and the class told me, can you come back and build something bigger, longer, to go deeper? And I said, well, challenge accepted. So I created the Northern Mine Remediation course, which is a 9-module course that has been reviewed by YG, and it gives 4 credits to the students for this course. And it covers everything from science to social challenges, especially related to First Nations, career opportunities, programs at YukonU, social and mining, etc., etc. And that course went really well last year in Pelly. This is the posters the students generated. They even came to my lab to some analysis. It was really cool to see them. And now we're reconducting it this year in Pelly, and we are in discussion with Ross River, Dawson, and Wetson Lake to do it as well, impacted by the pandemic, obviously. So conclusions, I wanted to have 15 minutes for questions, so I'm almost there. Conclusions, more research is needed to lead to better environmental practices in mining. And we need to understand and englobe the new ways of conducting research with First Nation worldview, which is a term I really like, used by our First Nation Initiative Department, the First Nation worldview, including traditional knowledge and Western science. And, you know, maybe as a last word of conclusions, I truly believe that research with remediation, with restoration component, is a tool that may be used for reconciliation. And in this context, I'm going to continue for the next 2 years to do my best with the Industrial Research Chair program, and obviously continue with YukonU for a longer period of time. I would welcome any questions now.
Thanks so much, Guillaume. That was a great presentation and really interesting and important work that you covered there. Just a reminder to folks, I'm going to look for the hand raised icon on your little, I don't know what to call it, your little screen. Or if you want to turn your camera on, I can look for your actual hand raised. Or if you'd like to type a question directly into the chat, I can certainly read it out on your behalf. Oh, I do see a hand raised. I'm just trying to figure out who it is. Skeeter, please go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to turn your camera on. That'd be great too.
Great, thank you. Needless to say, this is fascinating. There's a few of us here that have been involved in one aspect or another of reviewing remediation, reclamation, whatever you want to, whichever term you want to use, plans for Yukon mines. Regarding, just got to check my notes. My terminology is going to probably be wrong, but one idea that you described, and you described how you're doing the columns and had to add a heat source for the oxygen center. If that all proves, if you get enough information that you want to try it in a real situation, do you envision then a massive, with a massive container with a floor and walls and cover with an awful lot of this material in there in order to maintain the water levels? I'm just trying to envision how a real life application would actually, at the end of the day, what it would look like.
Thanks. Very good question. And the reason it's a very good question, it's because the essence of science is to try to understand with very small amount of things what it may look like in real life. So we always start at lab. So there's three main scale that we can use. Lab scales, where we work with very small volumes, but a lot of times to have a good representativity. If it works, you scale the project up to pilot scale, ideally bigger volumes, ideally on a mine site with real mine impacted water, real flow rates, that means real hydraulic retention time, real temperature, real seasonal events. And if that works, you scale the project up to a potential plant. So now you asked the question about those columns, and it's a very good question. Oops. So here we're just, this is not what the system will look like in the real life. This is a question that came from Casino Mining Corporation, and that told me we will have a pretty big tailing impoundment. I don't remember exactly, but you know, it's like 5K to on 6K. huge ones, we won't have the capacity to use a big amount of cover material to limit oxygen diffusion in the reactive tailings, what we call the PAG, potentially acid generating tailings. So we need to understand if oxygen diffusion is impacted by freeze and thaw cycles and how we can rely on freeze and thaw cycles. And I designed this experiment with that probe to understand that and to bring answers as a very, very primary answer to this problem. Now, how that will look like in scale 1, I don't know, that will be a real tailing impoundment. There won't be any probes in here, and actually the probe won't be an issue. But to be fully transparent, one of the problems with that experiment is when I freeze the column in my big freezer, which is here. Okay, that's a big freezer I have in my lab. The freeze comes from everywhere. So you freeze your column from all around. When in a real life situation, and that needs to be investigated in the phase 2, phase 3, the freeze comes from the top, from the seasonal freeze. So yes, I can provide very basic answers to say, okay, frozen water at a certain percentage of saturation will impact oxygen diffusion. And I can tell you exactly how and why, but are we close to the reality? Not yet. We need more and pilot scale. And you mentioned a big container. Why not? That would be definitely a pilot scale, filled up with real tailings, and see how they are reacting to freeze and thaw cycles and water levels. That could be a very good question. Right now, to not make this system too complex, I'm not even using tailings. I'm using quartz material, which is inert. And it's just supposed to mimic tailings with the same granulometry and physical characteristics, because handling real tailings could make a simple experiment like that really, really, really complex. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. There's a comment in the chat from Randy Lewis. He says, he or she says, excellent presentation and research methodology. I will donate all of the Arctic alpine revegetation research to your project if it would be of any assistance. Keep up the amazing work. Just looking for hands raised, or if it's a quiet group, I can just invite people who have questions to unmute themselves and turn their camera on. Oh, here's another question in the chat, and Skeeter's raised his hand, but I'll read the question in the chat first. Do you have any future plans to look into reclamation or restoration practices for placer mining?
Very good question. It's a question I often have. The answer is no. The answer is no, because the way my research program is being built, it's with active mines. So opening the gate to more active mines or abandoned mines or placer miners would be amazing. That would be, I would love to do that. Right now, I just don't have the capacity. That comes with very specific environmental challenges. You know, very often people ask me, do you work with ferro? No, this is an abandoned mines. It has very specific environmental challenges that just don't fit exactly in my area of expertise, which is active mining, quartz mining. And it's the same with placer mining. And especially for the revegetation project, I'm collaborating is too big of a word, because I just can't, but engaging with placer miners, because I know they have the same concern, and we are engaging and sharing the knowledge with the Placer Mining Association and many consulting companies to work on these topics together. But in the near future, do I have the capacity to work closely with placer miners as I'm doing with active mines? The answer is no, unfortunately.
Thank you, Guillaume. Skeeter, would you like to unmute?
Wow, this is fascinating. I've got a question. You referred to the mental mine revegetation exercise that you guys are involved with. one of the projects that I've reviewed, there was a concern raised that, okay, you're going to basically remove all the vegetation as part of the project, and afterwards we want to see it revegetated. I came across a concern where the initial proposal was, we'll go find a bunch of seeds and seedlings, and I mean, Randy's certainly well aware of this. But the concern that was voiced was, whoever it was that voiced a concern said, we found revegetation with seeds and seedlings included, unfortunately, some non-native species or subspecies. So that particular project, the requirement was prepare the ground, but rely completely on a natural revegetation from the areas that the vegetated areas that are on the borders of the project. So I don't know, is in the Minto situation, have you come across this difficulty where, you know, you buy a bag of whatever kind of seeds and find out that there's a few other species or subspecies in there?
So, very good question. I wish that Crystal Hisbister, the PhD candidate, was there and could answer very more precisely than me. But what happens is, first of all, you asked about Minto. As I said, I'm working with 7 mines called the consortium, and when I do a project, it needs to be representative for the rest of the industry, my consortium, but even across the north. I'm not a consultant. I'm not doing revegetation work. I'm supposed to create knowledge for the real consultants and the real people out there to grow their businesses and do the work. We're working a lot with environmental consulting companies in the Yukon. I'm thinking about Denacho Environmental. I'm thinking about Corgeo, and you can see it in restoration, to develop that capacity to create local native seeds. Because this is what I said when I went, that's the first point. Second point, the lack of commercially available seed bank. Now, Minto, originally we were supposed to conduct that project at Coffee Mine. Because of the pandemic, that was not possible. We reallocated the project at Minto, and we choose Minto because it is quite representative of the other mine situations. There is nothing super specific about this research site. So the knowledge generated will be able to be applied to other mines. Now, for the science, you asked about the bags with non-native seeds. For the science part, the technique we are developing or studying is we bought a bunch of alders, soapberries, and smooth-leaved mountain havens from BC, small shrubs. We brought them in and we planted them following these plans, more or less apart from each other. It's quite complex, so I'll try to be very at the surface of the project. And these shrubs that come outside from the Yukon are supposed to act for shelters for native seeds. These native seeds, we need to pick them up and choose them following First Nation consultation. So hopefully we will have more information because of the engagement in First Nation consultation we are doing. It's like full-time. Crystal Hisbister, the PhD candidate, she's working full-time on that to collect these data and be able to plant those native seeds and see if they can grow better being sheltered by the shrubs that we planted this summer. Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
We're almost out of time, but I'll just share a couple of comments and a question from Randy. There's some revegetation research we did with the KPMA about 20 years ago. I'm not sure where that is now. And Randy also advised, please do not buy a bag of seed from anywhere.
Good, yeah, thank you. Randy, I know Crystal reviewed your work and connected with you, so you're so knowledgeable, that's to be included in the research for sure.
Randy, you have your hand raised. Would you like to turn on your mic?
I'll go on. Yes. Hello, everyone. Incredible research that you're doing here. So the one comment I would make is what we really found was that even getting a Arctic lupin from Watson Lake compared to an Arctic lupin in Dawson, they are the same species, they key out the same, but they don't even look the same. They have different leaf color, they have different flower color, and it's the same, especially same is true with the grasses. You take an Arctic alpine grass, and the seed head is larger in the Dawson area than it is in the Selwyn Mountains, different than it is in the Richardson Mountains. And so the last 10 years, what we've been working on is use your site, identify on your site what is there, is naturally occurring there, harvest from there, grow on your site, use the stuff you grow, and put it back, and you will never introduce any foreign seed. I tried, and you guys all know how much time I spent on trying to take the native species and produce them. You just cannot reproduce what is there, no matter how hard you try and how close the species are. And this is Crystal's. This is, working with Crystal all these years. That's the one thing that we sort of found the most together, was that if you can, and then in the end, socially and economically, it makes the most sense. Harvest on site, grow on site, and teach on site, because then it all goes together. Because Guy, you mentioned making a caribou habitat. Well, there was another place we wanted to make it caribou habitat, but maybe also a training center for peeps. So there's just a few comments. Keep up the good work. It is so needed.
Thanks, Randy.
Yes, thanks very much, Randy. With that, we're out of time. Great presentation and discussion, really interesting. And I just echo the sentiments of encouraging you to keep up the great work. Definitely needed. And hope to see folks at our next Scope Talk. And hope you all have a lovely long weekend for Yukon.
Thank you. Have a good day and good long weekend, everybody.
Thank you so much.